Welcome back to another episode of Buckeye Talk. Stephen Means, Nathan Baird, and Andrew Gillis coming to you from the food room, this very, very large food room inside Lucas Oil Stadium after the second day of Big Ten Media Days, where we talked with Indiana head coach Tom Allen, Maryland head coach Mike Locksley, Minnesota head coach PJ Fleck, Purdue's new head coach Ryan Walters, Nebraska's new head coach Matt Rule, Wisconsin's new head coach Luke Fickell, former Buckeye, and then reigning Big Ten champ Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh. And we care about two of those names on this pod. We'll get into that other stuff maybe later, maybe we won't. But we'll start with, we also talked with Big Ten, the head of the refs, Carolo, excuse me.
Coordinator of football officials.
Thank you. I was looking for his title. Coordinator of football officials for the Big Ten, Bill Carolo, was also made available today, in which he got questions about Marvin Harrison and the hit that knocked him out of the Chick-fil-A. What is that bowl called again?
The Peach Bowl?
The college football. Yeah, thank you. The Peach Bowl, the college football playoff Peach Bowl against Georgia in the third quarter. Andrew, you talked with Carolo. What did he have to say about the hit and how he would have officiated it had it been Big Ten referees involved and not Pac-12 refs?
Yeah, so one of the things that he kind of talked about was that he mentioned, it was a dangerous play. That was the word that he used to describe it. And, he kind of talked about a couple of different things, but, obviously that was one of the words that, really kind of stuck out to me. Whenever you have, somebody like that calling a play dangerous on a play that there wasn't a flag, I mean, that's pretty significant. But the thing that he really kind of honed in on after that was, he said, when you see a play like that, that's a play that a lot of people think, okay, defenseless receiver, that's a personal foul. And if you want to throw targeting onto that, you can. Now, that was kind of how he would have liked to see it called. I mean, he said that the call on the field he was okay with. He watched the call on the field and went, I think that works. And then you go to replay and they overturn it. He said, for whatever reason, that's their decision that they're going to overturn it. That's fine. And he did kind of give them a little bit of credit. And he said, look, this is a tough call. Like, this is a really, really difficult call. This is a tough thing for them to do. But in his ideal world, and kind of everything that he kind of went back to was that if you call a personal foul on that play, then you can call a personal foul targeting and go to the replay booth, because his whole point was, a lot of fans see that and, you see a guy get knocked out, you see a guy get taken out of the game with a concussion. That's significant. And there's no flag on that. A lot of fans are going to have questions about that. So his whole point was, if you call a personal foul, if you say personal foul and targeting, then you go to the booth and review targeting. And if you decide there's not targeting, if you want to keep the defender in the game, that's fine. You're still going to have, now Ohio State in that scenario, if they had done that, wouldn't have had Marvin Harrison Jr. He would have obviously still been out with a concussion. Georgia still would have had their defensive player, but Ohio State would have had first and goal with, they were up 11 with under a minute left in the third quarter. I mean, you are, a couple of yards away, if not a yard away from making that an 18-point game. I mean, that's really, really big. And a lot of people and a lot of Ohio State fans say that decided the national championship game right then and there. So that was kind of that was the number one thing that I took away from it, was that, Buckeye fans should be thinking about this for as much as they do think about a play that happened a handful of months ago. Buckeye fans should be thinking about this in a way that is like, okay, even if you call off the targeting, they should have called a personal foul. And that was Bill's point, that if you call a personal foul there, you still get the end result. And the only thing that could happen there is that you're debating whether or not to throw the defensive player out of the game.
So, Nathan, I'm going to be a fan for a second. What am I supposed to do with that information? Because this is now the second time in the Ryan Day tenure where is it targeting, is it not targeting conversation has played a pivotal role in a playoff game for Ohio State. Now, the Shaun Wade one, by the letter of the law, clearly was targeting. It's just the stuff that follows after, maybe that was a conversation. This one maybe is a little bit more up in the air. But as I mentioned before, this isn't a Pac-12, coordinator of referees who's saying this. This is a Big Ten referee who had nothing to do with the game and would have had nothing to do with the game because they typically go with neutral refs for postseason games. So talk to me like I'm a fan. What am I supposed to do with this information?
I don't know. It's really not going to make you feel any better about anything, and it doesn't give you anything that you can change this scenario with. I mean, the game played out. There's human error as it relates to officiating, and it can go for against your team, and people can point out times it's gone for Ohio State. I think what's going to in any number of ways, there were so many what ifs from that game, right? Like, what if Cade Stover? What if Marvin Harrison still gets hurt, and everything plays out the way it did, but Cade Stover doesn't get hurt? Like, we pointed out multiple plays in that game where Cade Stover's absence was significant. Significant. What if they have a healthier backfield going into that game? Like, you can play a lot of what ifs. What if Lathan Ransom doesn't slip? Right? Like, this is just one of the many what ifs, and I think it's going to. It could be a thing that builds a little bit, because now you're starting to see it's in a line of what ifs for Ohio State. What if they're better prepared to play Oregon? What if Josh Proctor doesn't get hurt in 2021? Little things just keep happening. What if they'd had a fully healthy roster to play Alabama? They probably don't beat them in 2020, but do they make it a better game? Like, when does Ohio State get to have its moment where the what ifs stop being the story and the victory is the story? So I think it's probably a part of a line of frustrations. But again, this plays into why, when Doug and I on a pod recently asked, what's the one loss that you would flip in Ohio State history? What's the one loss you would turn into a win because it'd have the most ramifications? And we were surprised by how heavily that vote went to the Georgia game. But I think it's because it's both so present in people's minds, and also because people know that unlike 2006 or 2007 or 2020, you're not flipping the outcome of a game Ohio State didn't deserve to win. Ohio State deserved to win that game, had played well enough to win that game, and just had too many things like this that went against it. But this primarily, and I guess I think if you're an Ohio State fan, you could look at it and say, well, now this is a teachable moment. Now they will know how to better call this play the next time, whether it's in season, whether it's in another bowl game. But I think Ohio State fans are probably also jaded and have had enough of these happen in the last 4 years that they're going to say, well, they'll just find a different reason to screw up the call next time. And I understand where they're coming from.
So that's something that clearly it's not completely in your control, right? This is, the refs are making decisions in that situation, and that is what it is. And you've made a very good point. You tried to find a way to make a point in a situation where the answer is, I don't know. And I get that. But there are things that are here today at second day of Big Ten Media Days where Ohio State did have some control. And that is how they play against Michigan. And I wanted to hold this off into a break, but I think this is a perfect segue to just get into it with Jim Harbaugh, who off rip was one of the first things he was asked was back when he was still doing the TV segment. And it's kind of like the 15-minute segment where you give like an opening statement and then you get 2 or 3 fluff questions. But Dan Hope from 11 Warriors did get a real question in. On Wednesday, Ryan Day brought up the idea of potentially moving the Michigan-Ohio State game off of the last weekend, which, of course, caused us to do an entire pod about it and write stories about it. So, of course, the next step in that is the next day, ask the other person involved whose opinion matters on this subject right now. And it was Jim Harbaugh. Nathan, what was Jim Harbaugh's answer to that question?
Well, he didn't shut it down. He was definitely seemed to be more ambivalent about it, more indifferent almost towards it than Ryan Day was. Acknowledging that people like the Thanksgiving tradition, but basically saying whenever they want to play the game, we'll play the game. Whenever they tell us to play the game. He's not saying whenever Ohio State wants to play the game. He's not ceding that to them, but saying like whenever the Big Ten schedules that game, they'll play that game. I think he and Day may be of similar thought here, that it's more about practicality than about anything else. But I also think that maybe it's possible that he just hasn't thought this through to the extent that Day has. But he definitely seemed much more ambivalent about it, whereas Day came here and unprompted said, when he didn't have to, said, oh, maybe we should think about moving that. So it sounds like one of those things where, like, if they really pushed for it and if the Big Ten got behind it, Michigan's maybe not going to stand in the way, or at least Harbaugh's not going to stand in the way. But it doesn't sound to me like Harbaugh is eager to make this a hill he's going to die on and try to fight for it.
Am I crazy? I said this to somebody else after Harbaugh
Yes.
wrapped up today. Thank you. Jim Harbaugh is weird. I think we can all agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's weird talking to him, but it makes sense. Does that kind of like? I felt like I might be alone in this, but am I the only? Go ahead.
If people were to go back and watch his press conference today, not the one at the stage, but the one where it's the breakout tables, you'll see that Stephen Means got to be the starring player in one of these moments for Jim Harbaugh. Where first of all, I'm sitting on the opposite side, and whenever you ask Jim Harbaugh a question, he kind of leans towards you and gets this look on his face like you are speaking any number of languages that he's never heard before. Just the look he has on his face, like you're speaking something it's unintelligible to me. And then this is one of the best moments of the day. And then sometimes he's like, "Oh, I couldn't quite hear that. Can you repeat that?" Or I didn't quite understand that. But today he said, "I was thinking of something else unrelated. Could you repeat that question?" And that was a new one for me. That was a new one on the bingo card.
And like, so I tried to like go along with it for a minute and goes, "Well, what were you thinking about?" And he was like, "No, just ask your question again."
He didn't go for that. No,
I guess, and I do think that the thing I asked him, I think we don't have enough time here because they're going to kick us out of here in about 20 minutes here. But I do think I'll just put it in our listeners' heads for now, and I might even text this out. This idea that he has really hyped up JJ McCarthy this today, right? I whether it was the 15-minute session beforehand, just listening to him do radio hits and stuff as I was walking around, or the 45 seconds he mentioned Mahomes, he mentioned Josh Allen, and it wasn't a talent thing. It was one, he's super talented. Yes, he's a 5-star quarterback, but the way he talks about his teammates and the way his teammates respond to him, and it made me think of him the way I think we think of Dwayne Haskins and his impact at Ohio State in terms of there's what an Ohio State quarterback is before Dwayne Haskins and what an Ohio State quarterback is after Dwayne Haskins. You know, the NFL talent that you have to have. The Ryan Day wants us to be QBU. You have to be a Heisman Trophy level, first round talent level player to even for them to even offer you. I don't think Michigan's has to be that because they don't necessarily play the same offense. But I do think that, and it's what my question was, is has what you've seen from J.J. McCarthy in any way impacted your approach to finding quarterbacks? And even if he took the weird route to get there, he did kind of say yes in his hardball way. And I guess I'll ask you guys that. Is that a reasonable thing to say there when in terms of what J.J. McCarthy has been able to do for Michigan the last 2.5 years, what's coming up next behind him with Jaden Davis as a top 100 recruit? Can he be their kind of the guy who punches through the wall and finally this is what a Michigan quarterback is supposed to look like for Jim Harbaugh, even if they're all different skill sets?
You know, McCarthy is interesting because if you look at it through the Ohio State lens, it's not as impressive. He doesn't put up Ohio State quarterback numbers, passing numbers. It's not that kind of an offense. He's not that kind of a player. But when you look at efficiency, when you look at guys who get the job done and guys who win games, including beating Ohio State, including beating them in Ohio Stadium, he clearly does that. He clearly checks those boxes. And I think what Michigan is going to be in a situation where, Ohio State is cultivating its quarterback recruiting and its receiver recruiting together and hoping that those things kind of keep attracting top talent together. And that's clearly working, and it's working in perpetuity. They've got it lined up for 2024, 2025. They're doing fine there. In Michigan, when you build your team in a different way, then I think it gives you a little bit more leeway as to what kind of quarterback you're finding. You don't need to go find necessarily the same kind of NFL prospect to quarterback your team, but it's you also maybe don't always have a guy who's going to lift your team, and that's what I think with JJ McCarthy, that game was not won on his shoulders, even though they had some explosive passing plays last year. That wasn't him having to do what CJ Stroud was trying to do at the end of the Georgia game and lead a scoring drive. You know what I mean? They took what Ohio State gave them a little bit defensively in that game, and it did some big things on the ground. It obviously did some big things on the ground the year before. So I think that's maybe the next step before I'm ready to call McCarthy um, that kind of level of quarterback. I want to see it in a way where he's deciding the game. And Michigan builds itself in a way that it tries to minimize how often that has to happen, but it will have to happen at some point, I think, for him to truly break through. Because I think maybe the better comparison is someone like Stetson Bennett. And I know Bennett was not as highly recruited as a recruit than McCarthy, and McCarthy may be a better quarterback. I'm not trying to denigrate McCarthy when I say that, but in terms of style, you saw, I thought, Bennett go out and in his way command a game that I think is the next step for McCarthy.
Andrew, am I crazy?
Well, yeah, but not for that. Well, maybe. I think Nathan's right. When you talk about JJ, like I need to see it. Like I want to see him play Georgia and go toe to toe with the Georgia defense that has, a bunch of dudes going to the NFL, right? Like I want to see that. Now, obviously, like, you kind of look at their rankings, like in terms of, recruiting rankings for JJ McCarthy, like obviously he's really highly touted and everything like that. Steven and I were kind of talking before we started here. Michigan has Jaden Davis committed in their 2024 class. I mean, that's a top 100 recruit. That's a 4-star recruit. Like, I do think there is something there to be like success breeds success a little bit. I think that there is kind of that aspect of this with recruiting and kind of what Steven was talking about with, okay, maybe this is kind of the start of what you think a Michigan quarterback could be or can be. And I think that, if you're able to do this more and more, like if JJ McCarthy has a really good year, that's a really easy sales pitch to, prospective Michigan recruits at quarterback and say, hey, look, here's what you can be. Here's what we can turn you into. And, I think if you can start to do this year in and year out, I mean, the good programs recruit good quarterbacks every year, and you just kind of let the chips fall where they may, and then the kids who aren't going to play transfer. And I mean, that's just the landscape of modern college football. So like, I think, if you do this, you can have a really talented quarterback room in Michigan pretty quickly if you're able to, because it's not only like, can JJ McCarthy play well? It's like, can you turn this into a thing where you can turn it and show it to recruits and show it to maybe prospective transfers and say, this is what we want out of you. This is what we think you can do. We think you can take a next step. I mean, like Nathan said, I do have questions about kind of what JJ can do in terms of, can he go win a game? Like, we just haven't seen it. Like, can he go beat an Alabama type school? Can he go win a game on his own? Like, Michigan does so many other things really well that, you haven't really had to see that yet.
So, is there anything else from a Michigan standpoint? Because we talked a little bit about it on the Wednesday pod. It feels like Michigan's kind of the headliner, and it felt that way when we were we're all standing there listening to Harbaugh speak, and it feels like everybody's watching Harbaugh. It's kind of like, I don't actually know who had the bigger crowd between him and Ryan Day over the last 2 days. It might have been a pretty similar. So, is there anything else from Michigan and Harbaugh, whether it be a player or from just Michigan in general, that of note happened today?
I think Harbaugh might have had the bigger crowd, but I think it was partially because there are more people there that need to ask him about, NCAA problems and things like that than there are around Ohio State right now.
Yeah, which he wouldn't get into, and he made it clear multiple times that he was not allowed to say anything. He didn't even. I think someone tried to dress up a question at one point, and he even went like, "I appreciate you dressing up the question. I'm with you, chest bowed. I'm with you.
So
I just can't say anything about it."
Yeah, the beating of the chest was a really nice touch.
As it relates to quarterbacks, I did ask him because I've been curious. Obviously, last season, Michigan had an incumbent quarterback in Cade McNamara, and I had J.J. McCarthy, who had been sort of a backup, like niche. I use that word a lot, don't I? Kind of like a package quarterback. And they were competing, and Harbaugh decided to take that into the season. And I forgot to mark down exactly who they played. I know the second game was against Hawaii. That was the one that McCarthy started. The one that McNamara
They
started
played
was
Colorado
against
State to open the year.
Colorado State. That's right. So you're opening against Group of 5 teams, and I asked him, first of all, just how that helped him, and he said that practice scenarios can only take you so far, and when it was so close, they felt they had to do real game scenarios in order to finish that evaluation. And I asked if their schedule, and he's probably sensitive to this, so who knows? I didn't expect him to say, "Yeah, it helps that we play a crappy non-conference schedule." But I asked, did it help allow you to do that because you weren't opening with a Big Ten team? I didn't even say a Power Five team, like a non-conference. You know what I mean? You didn't have a Big Ten team to open against, so it would have been a very uneven, like what Ohio State would have to do this year. You're going to start one of them against Indiana and one of them against Western Kentucky, and that doesn't really work. And he dismissed that, though. He said no, like it was just this was how it had to happen. He said that the fairest thing in that situation was to take it to overtime, as he put it. And that's all in the context of the way Ryan Day was talking about Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. And if it really is that close, and if it really does push into the season, is it a thing that makes any sense at all? And I think for other circumstances around Ohio State's, it probably doesn't. I'm going to write about this for the site for tomorrow. It probably doesn't, but it's just unique. I thought it was interesting to hear Harbaugh say, it's easy to say. Would he have actually done it? I don't know. If he'd had to open against Indiana and then had another game after that, would they still have approached it the same way? I imagine they probably would have maybe played it out like they did in 2021 with the same scenario, and then let them each start a bad non-conference game and then make a decision. I don't know, though. It was interesting because he didn't have to confront it the same way that Ohio State has to.
Yeah, I think 2018 and 2019 are probably the only 2 years where this idea would have worked for Ohio State if they were in that position. Just because the schedules were kind of something like 19, I think they opened up with Florida Atlantic. 18, I think they opened up with Oregon State, who was very much in a down part of their program, was in some down years at that point. So that's the only time. Whether he admits it or not, that probably plays a role. Is when you can treat the first 2 games of the season like preseason games, it definitely helps in those situations. We're going to take a break real quick, and when we come back, I'm going to throw something else at Nathan and Andrew, and I'm going to ask them if I'm crazy, which we did a video earlier, and they didn't think I was too far off with that one. And it has to do with former Ohio State linebacker turned assistant coach, turned head coach, back turned assistant coach, Luke Fickell. And more on that when we get back here on Buckeye Talk.